West in California, the race for governor between Meg Whitman and Jerry Brown is now the most expensive in state history. Combined, those candidates have spent nearly $87.5 million since July 1st. But when you add in the primary races, the number jumps to $188 million. Much of that has come from Whitman herself, who's drawing heavily on her own personal fortune. President Obama is looking to set the record straight. At a backyard meeting in Seattle this week, he said why his administration hasn't gotten the credit he thinks it deserves and took some of the blame himself.
We had to move so fast. We were in such emergency mode that it was very difficult for us to spend a lot of time doing victory laps and advertising exactly what we were doing because we had to move on to the next thing. And you know, I take some responsibility for that. I mean, our attitude was we just have to get the policy right now with these old power lines.
Shira Tuplitz is a reporter for Politico. Good morning to you.
Thanks for having me again.
I'm glad you're here. You know, you hear the president saying that his administration's concern was getting the policy right. Did their failure to get the public on board hinder that progress to do so? Did they underestimate the importance of public opinion?
I think there's no doubt that they did. Let's look at the healthcare battle, for example. I don't think they anticipated the kind of public outrage that ensued after they started introducing legislation and how long the battle would go on for. It went on for months, and you had public outcry for months, and it turned into a public relations fiasco. If you ask any PR expert, they'll tell you that was not handled well from a PR perspective.
So at this point, then, Shira, is there any way for the administration to go back and reshape the way the public sees the policies from the first 18 months or so?
Look, I think at this point, you know, what's gone is gone. It's very difficult to handle your public image retrospectively. It's hard to manage something that's already happened now, what, even a year ago, 6 months ago. I think going forward, they've learned a lot of lessons, and I think they'll be handling some things a little differently. As Obama said, maybe, or as Obama hinted rather, maybe they'll be kind of boasting a little bit more about their accomplishments than they did in the last year. So maybe going forward, but I think the court of public opinion has kind of been determined on the last 2 years.
So you think that's how the president may go after distortions in his record, pointing back inward and saying, hey, this is what we got right, and talking more and more about that?
I think he'll point to the selective accomplishments of the last 2 years, but I think going forward, when he tries to do stuff, I think they'll be a little more offensive when it comes to their PR campaign. I think they're going to be much more proactive than, let's say, retroactive.
Yeah, okay. What about looking at these poll numbers from a recent Washington Post ABC News poll, which show more people oppose the president's changes to health care than support it now, by just barely, but 48 to 47%. The president says the changes will eventually be viewed favorably. Eventually in time for 2012?
Maybe, maybe not. Look, I'm actually reminded of a couple years ago with George W. Bush and the surge in Iraq and how unpopular that was at the time. And now let's look at this now. Is it going to be like one of those things where 2 years later, down the road, people look at it a little more favorably? Perhaps, but it's still a big question mark on that. We don't really know. And when you have Republicans campaigning all over the country on how they want to repeal the health care legislation, I mean, that's kind of a big negative, not in your favor.
Okay. Shira Tuplitz with Politico. Shira, good to see you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
President Obama is